Pick one persona, and I promise you it will have a halo effect, and you will speak directly to your most important target listener who's going to make the biggest impact on your goals, and you will make the biggest impact on their lives and their needs, and then it will halo out.
Welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Listen Network. Join your host, Dots Oyebolu, as he learns from CMOs, agency leaders, and business leaders about the state of performance marketing, plus insights on strategies, campaigns, and intelligence for commercial impact. Connect the dots and enjoy the latest episode.
Hi, marketers. This is Dots, and welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast. With me here is Michelle Khouri, CEO and founder at FRQNCY Media and also at Recordical. We will discuss the rise of audio marketing in a brand lift ecosystem. Do you want to get into the ecosystem? Then join us. Michelle, welcome. How are you doing?
Hey, Dots. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm living vicariously through it being sunny for you and super rainy here in Atlanta.
I know. Great backdrop, by the way.
Thank you. I'm at Recordical Studio in Atlanta.
Absolutely. So yeah, tell us about your career. Tell us about your companies as well, Recordical and the others. How did you even get to this point in the first place? Give us all that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a sound nerd. So when I was little, I was a singer, and then I was in musical theater, which I'm still a huge musical theater nerd. I just don't perform anymore. I let pros do that. And then I was in the music industry very briefly. I worked at Interscope Records as an intern, and then left that and had a full career, 12 years in corporate marketing. So if you look at what I do now, it's a synthesis. It's a perfect synthesis of all of those things, as life is wont to do if you allow it to lead you down the right path. And what I do now is I founded a company called FRQNCY Media. It's a podcast production company for major brands, influential individuals, advocacy groups. And so through FRQNCY Media, we produce podcasts for those brands. So Coca-Cola, TurboTax, the Jane Goodall Institute, advocacy groups like the All We Can Save Project. We talk a lot about climate action on our podcast because that's a personal mission and passion of mine. So with FRQNCY, we do full-fledged client service, B2B marketing. B2B is our focus, but some of our clients are B2C brands like Olaplex or the Honey Pot Company, and others are more B2B. That's what we do on the FRQNCY side. And then more recently, about a year and a half ago, I launched a new side of the business called Recordical, which is I'm very excited about and is also the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's what I'm sitting in right now as a Recordical studio. And Recordical is a first of its kind membership platform and hopefully one day global network of studios. Right now we have this one pilot studio here in Atlanta. And what it is a membership, a monthly membership where you sign up as an independent creator. You could be a voice actor, a content creator, a podcaster, a journalist, whatever it is. A storyteller who needs to use audio and good audio, and a Twitch streamer. And you sign up and you can get access with those credits to any Recordical studio or Recordical equipment locker, smart lockers across the world, as well as a full library of like masterclass style courses and content and ebooks to help you really know how to use, promote, and grow audiences around audio. So that's the Recordical side versus the FRQNCY Media side. And you can see how my background as an independent creator, as a singer, as a performer, and as a marketer have all come into this one umbrella.
No, it's, first of all, we were discussing this at the backstage, if I will use that word. Incredible concept. Great idea.
Thank you.
You are in the right place at the right time. Let's all ride this wave to the end of the day. I'm all in myself to the end of the decade.
Amen. Preach.
I can only wish you great results on that. Now to the topic. Now, audio marketing, right? We know that it's going beyond listens, or in my case, downloads, as a means to help with brand lift. So what are some of the benefits of looking at audio marketing differently and using that as a very good tool for brand growth?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of archetype in my world you are. Like, I'll focus on these brands, like the larger brands, or perhaps your Series A or B kind of startup or company, all the way to the multinationals. a podcast of your own as a brand is incredibly powerful. There are a lot of research studies that show that podcasting is the most trusted medium of any digital channel. It is so intimate. And the reason I love working with sound is because we are born to connect. As long as you have the ability to hear, you are born to connect through that ability to hear. And you are born to, we all have this incredible ability to suss out safety, authenticity, connection, danger, all through the sense of hearing. And so when you are speaking directly into someone's eardrums, which is what a podcast is, whether you have a video aspect or not, they're sussing you out. They know if you mean or not, because we have that internally. So that's the high level answer. And the more grounded marketer's answer is brand affinity and brand trust. And that is something that is incredibly hard to achieve and attain. And there's no number of Facebook ads or Instagram ads or any number of newsletters that you can send that can parallel the kind of trust and intimacy you can build with your audience through a podcast. And not to mention, it's one of the most affordable things you can do if you're focusing on an audio podcast.
Yeah, there are a million steps to a million steps to creation. Which is
I'm not saying it's cheap, but I'm saying it's cheaper.
Yeah, it's cheaper, exactly. So that makes a lot of sense. And I have one question that I'm going to ask at the very end. So if you're listening and watching, just stay tuned with regards to why brands should have their podcasts, with the emphasis on have. I will stop there before I spoil anything. But I've been thinking, Michelle, very lately about advancements in technology. I know people would say, yeah, everybody's jumping on podcasting these days. There are almost 5 million podcasts.
Which is nothing, by the way. That's such a small number.
Yeah, that's very small.
I'm like, I watched 5 million Netflix shows last month. Are you kidding?
For some people who love podcasts, it may feel a bit tight. I love audio. I am subscribed to YouTube Music and YouTube Premium. You see how insane that is? So I'm an audio guy. But yeah, something else that I love is some of the ways in which you can smartly consume this audio, Internet of Things, basically. So smart speakers, voice-activated devices. I'm driving my kid to school and I'm like, Google, give me the latest news. And my kid says, Daddy, I want to listen to a song by Owl City. So we're always having that fight every morning.
I'm sure. And who wins?
Of course. Yeah, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, good. That's a good balance.
Let's meet in the middle here, please. I love audio. I've been researching and I see that, for example, Sonos, the speaker, is really growing in popularity compared to the other smart speakers we already know. And for example, they've got Sonos radio, but I don't think that's even connected to their speaker, right? Apple, Amazon, Google, they've all made their podcasting platforms the default for their smart speakers. Again, that's something else for the future. But my question really is, how do you see all these advancements I'm talking about? How do you see them influencing the effectiveness of an episode or even the marketing of that episode for brand elevation? Like you said, the content has to be good. It doesn't matter whatever tactic you use. The content has to be good. Same thing goes with some of these smart speakers as well. I think the future is smart speakers. I don't care if AI reaches singularity and then reaches plurality. Smart speakers could be key. That is what I think. And I think podcasting might still survive another 20 years. So again, we'll see how it goes. But to the question, how are all these, and you can give me some other advances as well. It's the smart speakers I'm thinking of right now. Give us some of the other advances in audio consumption that brands can really.
There's not many. Yeah. There really aren't. I think the biggest advancement in audio consumption is the branching of audio only into video. In other words, how normal it is to see podcasts pop up on TikTok and how normalized that has become. That's really in the last year. In the last year, that has happened. And before that, when we were trying to promote on TikTok or other platforms visually with podcasts, it was it really was not received well, and people thought it was like stodgy and weird. So now podcasting has an aesthetic, a visual aesthetic that people are comfortable with. This is the aesthetic. People are used to seeing the headphones on. People are used to seeing the microphone in frame. That's a big
I've
deal.
got mine, but it's a bit broken.
Well, you're not
which is
matching
why
the aesthetic. So, Dots, what are we doing? But that's a big deal because this used to be considered a dorky thing to do, and this was a dorky look, and now it's all the rage and it's been normalized aesthetically. I think the societal advancements are underrated, and we need that more than anything for traction with promotion and audience growth strategies when it comes to audio properties like podcasts. And it also means that it's pretty much a standard now that we record video with every podcast, which is a pretty simple thing to do. You don't have to blow it out of the water. I was just watching a YouTube video of these incredible folks and I can't remember the name of the production company, but they did this full studio setup with one guy in Australia, the other guy, I don't know, somewhere in the US. And it looked like they were together in person. That's like a multi-$1,000 setup. It's crazy. You don't need that. That's really cool. They did a good job, but like, you don't need that. You just need this. My laptop propped up, yours propped up, and recording the video so people can put a face to the name if that's how they consume content. Now, the one thing I'll say about smart speakers is it's not so much the technology, because the technology has been around and people have been playing with the idea of skills and podcasts for a while. It's curation. I think the thing that we are going to start seeing more and more are technologies that curate based on your preferences, the same way that, and you say you're a YouTube premium subscriber, I'm about to come out and tell you that I'm a Pandora premium subscriber. I like Pandora. I like curation done for me based on my preferences. So I don't like having to put together a playlist, because also I get bored and I like surprise. So I'll be listening to, with Pandora, Ella Fitzgerald in one moment, and then the next moment SZA, and then the next moment Jungkook, and the next moment Fujikaze, and I stay surprised. I think that is the level of curation. And I remember when Pandora first came out, I was in middle school, I think, and it was called the Human Genome or the Music Genome Project, something like that. And it was it was groundbreaking that there was this music platform that could learn your taste in music and then match it and help you discover other similar styles. We don't really have that for podcasting yet. And that is where I could see smart speakers helping to advance a technology or advance podcasting. Because imagine you're in your car and you're like, Alexa or Apple or Siri, play narrative podcasts about ghosts and paranormal activity. And then all of a sudden there's a curated list of episodes, not just podcasts, but episodes from podcasts. And
I tried that 2 days ago.
Did you? And how did it go?
Yeah, it went well. I think I was asking it to give me podcasts about medical devices. What I saw, though, and you feel free to comment on that, is the titles had some level of semantic match with what I see. So is it important for us to be able to appropriately title our episodes? Not necessarily the podcast. Yes, we can title the podcast, but do you think it's appropriate to title our episodes properly so that sort of,
No, that's where I think the technology is going to evolve, because like, for instance, now just very recently, Apple Podcasts rolled out, I think in the last month or two, automatic transcription of episodes. So that's where AI can scrape. And that's where much more relevant content can come about. So even if it's putting together podcast recommendations for you, they're probably clunky and not really on the nose. That's where I think we're going to see some major advancements. And I would guess that it's actually like a third party technology that develops that plugs into the smart speakers. Because anytime we're relying on such a massive entity like Apple or Amazon or Google to also take on this piece of the puzzle, they're focusing on so many things. So it's much more likely that we see, and there are technologies like this out there. There are companies doing this, and I think they're just going to grow because a lot of it is hand curation.
They might get bought up by the juggernauts. So.
Or partnership, right? Or it's something that gets integrated in it. Because right now I integrate Pandora into Alexa, and that's how I play my Pandora account through Alexa. So I think that there's integrations that will happen. Yeah, that's where I think the developments will.
I love that idea. I love the fact that the system AI, Jesus, the last 12 months, I will almost put it as my surname. Same as you, same as everyone else. Can now make the content work, which helps people like us that create podcast briefs. Because I can say, Michelle, what do you know about podcast SEO? And you respond, what I know about podcast SEO is this. And the system picks that twice. So if you don't have a structured conversation where you are deliberately inserting certain keywords, then that may not help. But yeah, that I never thought about that. The fact that what Apple has started might help in a way whereby, podcast SEO is just as dynamic. It's not really as it's not based on like titles or descriptions, which is like ancient SEO practice.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Of course, today is not the day for that, but standard search is about to change too. So I think at the end of it, it's just about the content. Whatever content it is, especially in what we are discussing now, which is audio content, but podcast. We know podcast sits on top of audio right now. You must be able to plan that properly. I'm not saying you over prepare, which is why sometimes I deliberately send briefs to my guests when it's 15 hours before. I don't want you to over prepare. I don't want you to come like you're on the CNN or CNBC show. I want
well, actually, Dots, podcasting is quite advanced now.
So
yes.
It's
I love when people get in front of a microphone and immediately go into an NPR voice. And I'm like, no. This is podcasting. Chill. Be yourself. Like you're G.
I love that. NPR voice.
Today I'm talking to Dots and we're going to talk about podcast marketing. Who is she?
Yeah, it's like we are too stressed out to have something else come on that. So the thing I'm really trying to achieve, which I think has been working, is a mix of entertainment and education. How do we discuss a thoroughly important topic in a very fun way, right?
Yes,
if you're listening, if you're
absolutely.
watching, do you really feel like skipping now? So many laughs, so many daddy jokes. I'm sure some of them didn't hit, but a few hits, and so on.
Well, and listen, Dots, at the end of the day, it all depends on your target audience because some people want infotainment and some people want the info and they want to get out.
Knowledge.
Yeah. Like and that's a huge part. Even SEO, you talked about like titles, descriptions, the metadata is what we call it. It's not as much about SEO is important, especially now. So why not do it? But it's about reaching your target listener. What's going to resonate with them? What kind of title, what kind of description is going to actually resonate with them and get them to click play? Because we have all done it where we open up the show page on whatever our favorite listening platform is, and we scroll through the episodes trying to like vibe which one's for us. What do you think we're doing? We're taking in the title and the information and seeing if it resonates and it's meant for us. Same thing with the content. What kind of podcast should you have as a brand, especially? Yes, it needs to reflect your brand, but it also needs to reflect your listener. They need to see themselves in the content and see that you are specifically speaking to them. A lot of brands come to us and they're like, we want to speak to everyone. And I'm like, don't we all, honey? But like, just pick one persona. And I promise you, it will have a halo effect and you will speak directly to your most important target listener who's going to make the biggest impact on your goals. And you will make the biggest impact on their lives and their needs. And then it will halo out. It's not like we're exclusively like knocking everyone else off the platform, but we need to make sure we know who we're talking to fundamentally.
The flip side, Michelle, is people who come to you to say they want extremely niche audiences. So we have a customer now that just wants to target folks in the open access review industry. Like, how many impressions can you get from that? It has been one of my most challenging projects, but I don't think anyone in the world is going through what I'm going through.
Probably not. Validating and hearing you. But I will say, if we've had those projects too, where it gets real niche, that's cool. And if it's like going to a really niche conference and putting on a panel presentation, right? You don't expect 10,000 people to show up. You expect about 50 to show up. So think of that in terms of podcast listens. If we're getting 100 to 500 listens on a super niche podcast and it's consistent, that's a win, because this is a very niche subject and we're getting people to show up. And as long as it's the right people, and we know it's the right people because we look at the listen through rate or the consumption rate. And if they're sticking around for around 60 to 80% of the episode, they're interested. So that's cool. Niche is great with podcasting. Honestly, I prefer folks wanting to go too niche than folks wanting to go too broad.
Too broad. Yeah.
They expect the world and it misses the mark and they don't know why. And it's like, because we don't know who we're talking to.
And they'll look for the fall guy and they'll make you, Michelle, the fall guy.
I am a professional fall guy. Founder, CEO, executive producer, professional fall woman. Blame me. It's cool.
In a way, you've answered my next question, but maybe you can speak more to it. Looking at a brand that caters to culturally diverse audiences, you had spoken about the NPR style versus the Dots Loves marketing style of guests and listeners. You've spoken about being broad and not broad, but there's also even the aspect of culture, like, the Harley Davidson fans, Red Bull fans, right? Yes, they are selling a product that other people make, but they've got a brand culture and they've got a product market fit with that brand culture as well. How do you help people navigate all that, especially when you have to combine 3, 4, 5 factors together?
Ooh, I would say, first of all, that's a great question. Second of all, it's really difficult because with podcasting, it's not just the brand culture, it's the podcasting culture. So the brand has to be open and prepared to adjust its own brand identity and culture into the podcasting space. And probably like the best example that I have is Coca-Cola. When we first started working with them, my company was like months old. It was 2018. They were like our first major brand client, and they wanted to make an employee podcast or a podcast for employees that was internal only and that featured only their executive leaders of North America. And we were like, that's cool. Number one, we highly suggest we make this external. And already that's very unnerving for a brand like Coca-Cola. And I told them, and this is a good lesson for any brand looking for an internal podcast, make the employee podcast external. It's going to get out anyway. If you have tens of thousands of employees, honey, that's external already. It's not going to be like locking. And people are going to leak it. So you may as well put it out there and show that you have nothing to hide and show that there's a lot of pride behind your employee culture. American Airlines does this really well with Tell Me Why, and we're now doing that again. So we did that for Coke once, we're doing it again now. We told them that, they accepted, which was really awesome of them. And then I did something very scary. And I said, if you're going to have your executive leaders on this show, we need to unmedia train them. We need them to show up as human beings, no censorship, and anything they say that you don't feel comfortable putting out there, guess what? It's your show. It's not going to get out there. We're going to cut it. But we need them to feel safe to truly be themselves. And what resulted was an award-winning podcast. We won Best Employee Podcast from the Reagan Communications Awards because it is the first time that their employees heard their leaders cry, emote, talk about failure, not be perfect robots. And I commend Coca-Cola North America so much for taking our advice because it was a very uncomfortable thing for them. And of course, we accommodated that by having like their communications directors and chiefs of staff in the room while we recorded, flagging things as we went, really respecting their levels of comfort with what we included. But these leaders also felt it was like catharsis for them. They could be them and talk about things that they'd never talked about openly before, and that humanized them. So the other result of that isn't just an award, which is nice to have. What's like the real traction of that? The real result of that was that the employee engagement went up 30 points from before the podcast to after the podcast. And that's huge.
Wow.
So that is a great example of a brand that is so solid on its culture and identity. That is 160 years old. That's a huge brand culture that allowed itself to really fit into podcasting culture as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love when guests share case studies. And I really love the fact that you share that as well. Of course, 2018 it wasn't as popular, right? Just to give a context.
No, it wasn't.
Someone told me, and I don't know how true this is, that during the pandemic, it was just 1.5 million podcasts. And now we are like 4.6, 4.7. So at that
I
point,
think we were at like 2. Yeah.
yeah, podcasts were not popular at that time. So being able to move that forward is really awesome. And if you're listening, if you're watching, you might be on the agency side, you might be on the brand side, and you're looking to pitch this idea of a podcast. Now, I think before it was about how do we even pitch this into existence. But what you might see, given the cold recession, as I call it, so it's a recession without a recession, is
Yeah, I know. It's like a phantom
right.
recession.
There's no recession, but people are getting fired. Anyway, how do you sell this to hit some sort of a business objective, especially in the long run? It's been setting expectations. You're looking at brand lift, and you tell them that measuring brand lift is not something that you do in 90 days, for example. To be able to run a brand lift on Google, for example, you need to be spending consistently 40K a month on YouTube ads, and then they run it across like maybe after a 6-month or a 1-year period. It's a long game. I think this is the biggest thing there. It's a long game. And yeah, you want to something that please add?
Yeah, it's the long game with other forms of media. That's what's powerful about podcasting. And when you're strategic, and that's why these organizations, these brands work with my company, because we concept the shows. So we actually do the strategic concepting, and we learn who your target listener is, we refine it, and then we create a concept around that. So we are taking the best possible approach. And then we are helping you roll out the marketing, and we do digital content retainers. So we create the assets and we help you roll out the marketing around it. You can put paid behind that.
Yeah.
But when we are creating a concept that is getting the right host in the talent chair and the right guests across from them, and we're having the right kinds of conversations, I'm sure there's a stat out there. So this is not an official stat. This is just me being me, but it's 10 times more effective. And it's really not about long game. It's about, as long as you're releasing those podcast episodes, promote the heck out of them. Get them out there, because your audience needs to hear this. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, right? Like, we made an incredible podcast, push it out. And you will see, we had a client, and I can't share details. I asked if I could, but I can't. But we had a client that we made a podcast for, and it was a major B2C brand, major. And we made the podcast with them. The recession started hitting, the phantom recession. They were like, I don't know about this whole podcasting thing. Pulled back.
They always cut in marketing first, but go on.
And podcasting. And I'm like, this is folly, because podcasting is cheap. We could keep doing this. And it's like such a good form of marketing for such a cheap spend compared to your other channels. But listen, I fought the good fight, and now I'm just like, do you? And we'll be here. You know where to find us. So speaking of which, they cut podcasting. They were like, we're not going to do this again. Thankfully, they have an internal study where they measure the return on investment, the ROI of all of their different media campaigns and digital platforms. And the results of that were that podcasting had the highest return on investment of any other form of media. And so they were like, knock, knock, knock. We'd like to do podcasting again. And I was like, this is so exciting, because we obviously preach this from the rooftops, and we say this all the time, and we have a 1-pager that we hand out, but it's hard for that not to sound like BS when it's coming from the podcast production company. So it was really exciting to see that. And we know this. It's very well known that podcasting, when done right for a brand, yields enormous ROI. And teasing that question of later, enormous ROI when you have your podcast as a brand.
Yeah, I know. Wow. This has been really awesome. I still have one more question for you. Very interesting as well. Maybe controversial too, but I'm sure we'll have fun answering the
Bring
question.
it. I'm ready for it. I'm Colombian. We're ready for controversy.
Exactly. Say Colombia. May I add Nigerian to that as well?
Exactly. We're fine.
Yeah, we're good. So and just before we get into the break and ask that last question, you're absolutely right. I think we are not asking you guys to just go in all in. Hey, podcasting. I think we've made all the justifications in the world, which is nice. But be purposeful about it. And if you follow the case studies that Michelle is saying, there's a lot of purpose in why some had to be done, some couldn't be done, and things like that. So it's important for you to be able to look at that and say, okay, this is how I want to approach my own podcast. And I agree with you, Michelle, on low volume, bigger reach. If you're as broke as myself, just power through 200 episodes in a year, and hopefully the algorithm will do itself organically. There's that, but if you've got smaller episodes, but they are great because you've done a lot of planning to it. Today is not the day to discuss podcast formats, but people who do narrative podcasts and things like that are very well done. We have a client that we advertise for. We don't produce for them, but they do a 1-minute skit on their podcast,
Oh,
which I
that's
think
awesome.
is
Yeah.
pretty good
That's so
for
fun.
retention. Yeah. If you have that, but it's limited, then you can easily be able to push that through podcast marketing, which is what we are discussing. Okay. Last question, but we need to go on a quick commercial break. It will be the Dots Rapid Fire. As you can see, Michelle will just walk through that fire and laugh through it. Not because she's Colombian, but because she's an expert at podcasting. Guys, don't go anywhere. I'm sure you've been enjoying this. Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Listen Network. There will be links to resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Guys, welcome back. So like I said, it's the Dots Rapid Fire. Michelle is going to be in the marketing court of law as a witness, where she will answer the truth and nothing but the truth. Michelle, are you ready?
I'm scared now, but sure.
I'm sure you'll be all right. Okay. The first question, what is your favorite marketing metric apart from sales or revenue?
The listen through rate or the consumption rate of a podcast, because that's a really good way to gauge if your audience is actually sticking around for the content.
Yeah. Very interesting metric if you're in the space. Something I've been working on because we drive traffic and people often try to question the traffic. We were saying something at the very beginning about you are trying new things is the hardest thing you've ever done. I think with the studio product, it's almost like the hardest thing I've ever done with podcast advertising.
Yeah.
How to drive traffic to a podcast, a traffic you can track because of our ad tech, but how to also keep people engaged with that traffic.
Yep.
We are getting there.
If a consumption rate is low, like below 60%, that means that something isn't hitting. And if you start seeing that people are dropping, and this is only something you can see in Apple Podcasts, Podcast Connect platform. Yeah. But if you're seeing that, that means that it's time to reevaluate your content, either the structure of your content, maybe your intros are too long, maybe you have a mid-roll spot and it's actually losing audience, or maybe you're speaking to the wrong listener and you need to do a little bit more of a refresh. So it can be a daunting metric, but it's my favorite because it really shows you how engaged your listener is in the content.
We had 3 plugs on my episode. I didn't know that for the first 100 episodes or even more. And I was like, no, let's call it out. Let's keep just one.
Yes, that's amazing. That takes bravery to do. That's a big decision.
Oh, yeah, of course. I will look at the KPIs. We have QBRs, but I'm not too bothered about that. It's just simple. Put yourself in the position of the listener. Would you want to see 3 plugs on your episode?
Exactly.
Some of the questions I asked myself, I'm like, no, let's just scale this back, please. And they did. Very important points there in terms of what you mentioned. I will not lie. Our own benchmark for clients is 50%. That's because we've seen how incredibly hard it is to even get to 50% in the first place. But we've seen businesses that have done 70% and above. And whenever that happens, we let them know that they're in the top tier. They're in the big boys club. So,
I'm glad that you said that because it really is hard. And I'm very proud to say that most of our productions get almost 80% consumption rate. And the ones that get a little bit lower consumption rate are the ones that are going broad with their audience. So that's because you're just not going to hit it every time. Yeah. But it is a constant exercise. And obviously we're talking about average consumption rate because some episodes are going to hit, some episodes are not going to hit. So you want to look at the average of the last 5 to 10 episodes or however many episodes you have. Yeah. If you have 200 episodes like you, Dots, which is like very rare, very few people have that kind of chutzpah and energy. It's so commendable. I admire it so much. But for someone like you, you probably want to look at like the last 10 to 20.
Yeah, there are tools like we use Co-host. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Of course.
So I don't know, they somehow found consumption rates for Spotify as well. I don't know if it's something that
Okay.
Spotify has released or they haven't released, but yeah, that's someone listening that is looking at comparing both platforms. Then you can look at that too. Because, and you can comment briefly on this, some people would say Apple Podcasts are for the B2B guys. But this is me, a B2B guy with a $2,000 phone, but it's not Apple. So please
Nah.
don't fall into that error of Apple
Yeah.
Podcasts.
I don't see it as a B2B thing. I think it's just another platform that gives analytics. It just is so narrow. I mean, if you look at like your listener, it's because of the RSS feed, which is such a beautiful thing. It's also just spread all over, and people are listening to your content through myriad platforms. So you get like a little slice over here from Apple Podcasts, you get a little slice over here from Spotify, a little slice from your hosting platform, or a big slice from your hosting platform, and you have to synthesize it. It's so annoying.
Exactly. So just something to keep in mind there. Don't get it twisted, guys. We are still on the rapid fire. Now, question 2. How long do you use social media every day for work?
Who's asking and why do you want to know? So many hours. I would say that it's hard to really know where social media for work begins and ends versus personal, because it's also, at least for me, staying visible with my network and my community on Instagram stories, let's say, keeps me top of mind for people and me sharing the work. And I post some TikTok videos that have nothing to do with anything. Like I'll post like silly little dating videos on TikTok, but it just shows my personality. And that actually ties back to brand trust and getting to know the personality of Frequency, where we call each other freaks on my team, FRQs. Like we're just a little bit weird and fun, and we like to have the joy of audio, which is such a weird history. Audio is weird. We're all weirdos in audio in a fun way and a harmless way. But yeah, so I spend hours every day making sure that I'm trying to talk as much as possible at what we're doing without spamming people, adding value and entertainment to people's lives through posting. And if I don't have anything to say that's going to improve my followers or friends or networks' lives, like I don't say anything. So it just depends.
Yeah, I think if you see anyone that is truly passionate like yourself in podcasting, they obviously have some audio background. Our boss, Jake Jogovan, is a part-time DJ. I have a TikTok channel where I whistle and hum in harmony. Not many people can do that. Not many people can do that without training. We all have unique,
This is why I started Recordical, because all of us really do this passionately. And Twitch streamers, I love live streamers. I think they're so amazing. And they use really good mics and great audio. And there's people who want to break into these things and don't know where to start. And to me, Recordical is like my love letter to audio weirdos. It's just so fun.
Absolutely. And don't worry, I will make sure that people are able to take action on that as well, because again, I personally think it's an exciting project. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
For sure. Last rapid fire, your favorite marketing quote. What's it?
So my favorite marketing quote ties into what we've been talking about, and it is, the best marketing doesn't feel like marketing. And Tom Fishburne, who's the founder and CEO of Marketunist, said this. And it just ties back to why I think podcasts are so powerful for brands, because the way to not make the right branded podcast is to make it sound like a commercial. In fact, your brand's podcast should have very little to do with your brand, unless you're talking about a cult brand. Like Trader Joe's has an incredibly successful podcast called Inside Trader Joe's that's all about the brand, but it's like about the brand, but about the ethos and the stories behind the brand. So even then, it's not like, this is why Trader Joe's is great. They already have the cult following, right? So yeah, absolutely. The best marketing doesn't feel like marketing.
Yeah, I think it will be that day. I'm going to drink a glass of wine once we get Tom on the podcast. We've been chasing him for about 6 months.
That would be awesome.
Very busy.
I quoted you, so show up.
Yeah, I've had my friends. I'm like, have you interviewed this guy? And it's Tom. I'm like, yeah, man, I've been chasing him for a while. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so the final question. I know we are over time here, but if you're listening, I'm sure you've been enjoying this as much as myself. So the big question. It's understandable that brands should get on podcasts, regardless of the size. What would you pick between brand owning their own podcast and sponsoring another podcast? I don't know if you've seen podcasts that a brand's just sponsor. They have no idea
Oh, yeah.
about what goes on. The content matches, right? Their audience.
Yeah.
Which one would you pick?
Yeah. So this is a great and very relevant question now, especially when podcast advertising is back on the upward trend. CPM rates are going up with podcast advertising. It's returning to being, I might venture to say, a boom in podcast advertising.
May I clarify? In-stream advertising. So that's the one that plays inside
In-stream,
the episode.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is where we need you, Dots. Exactly. In-stream and like pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll ads. So there's podcast advertising, there's podcast sponsorship. So for instance, we produce Let's Talk Menopause's podcast called Hello Menopause, and Always Discreet sponsored the production of that, and they were the sponsor. So that's different. And then there's owning your own podcast, hands down. Absolutely, the most effective, highest return on your investment is to have your own podcast. No one here, if you've been listening, is going to be shocked that I say that. I don't slam people. Far from slam. I really appreciate those who sponsor other podcasts and who advertise in stream on other podcasts, because that helps our industry continue and it helps independent or smaller organizations create podcasts. It makes it feasible. But without a doubt, if BetterHelp, for instance, and you are one of the top advertisers, in-stream advertisers in podcasting, it's time for you to have your own podcast too, because an ad can be skipped and will be 1,000 times. But the real story and the value add that you can share behind your brand ethos as BetterHelp to communicate with the world at large and your target audience specifically, there's no amount of advertising that can replace that. I can absolutely guarantee you the ROI is remarkably different. And the good news is most of these brands out there have the budget to do both if they really want to have the advertising side and the content side. And we're happy to help them figure out how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for, I call it the it depends answer. But what you've also done is you've said it could also be a journey thing whereby you've done the sponsorship for a while and now it's time to have your own property, as we would call it.
Absolutely. And listen, that's really important because I could tell you, or Dots could tell you 1,000 times that this is a good idea for you. But if you're just not comfortable with it, it's not a good idea for you. And you need to figure out how to dip your toe in. And a lot of folks dip their toe in through sponsoring other podcasts or advertising in stream, just to get a sense of this like world of audio that is so different to them. It feels so foreign to a lot of these brands that haven't dabbled before. So what we do is when a brand is ready, even apprehensively ready, they come to us and they're like, I think we're ready for a podcast. And I'm like, okay, great. And we usually do a pilot season just to show them, okay, we'll do our 8 episodes. You'll see how it feels. And that's a really great way. And also that apprehensive brand absolutely needs a full service podcast production company. Do not think you can just tap a few people on your team, give them an extra job that they are not well versed in because they're not podcast producers or audio experts, and then think that's your best shot. Go to a full service podcast production company. Trust me, it's not just FRQNCY out there. There's so many. There's so many of us.
I can say that from experience, honestly. It's just a lot. It's just a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's you.
There's a lot of people who can do it for you, and you need to tap into those resources, Yeah,
and let's just go straight into that as well. Again, thank you so much for this. I will do something to prove that this is one of my favorite episodes, and we'll discuss that in camera. But thank you so much for an amazing time. But again, yes, any brand listening that is still thinking about it, maybe shopping around between who to help with, should we do it internally, should we sponsor or do our own, where can they find you to learn more? Those learning about podcasts as well, even from a trade perspective, where can they learn more and follow you with all the wisdom that you've given and more?
Thank you very much. This has been so much fun. So I really appreciate you sharing your platform like this. and bringing the energy. And folks can find all things frequency at FRQNCY.media. There she is. There's the website, FRQNCY.media. And I offer one-on-one consulting sessions. So if you want to launch a podcast and you're not like a major brand, or you're on a marketing team, or you're even a producer who wants to get more insight on where to go in their career, I offer one-on-one consulting sessions. And then, of course, we offer full service productions. You can contact us through that little pink bubble there at the top or at the bottom right corner that goes straight
For
to
those of you
me and my
watching.
team.
Yeah. Could you also
For those
spell the
watching.
website for those listening? Just, spell
Absolutely.
the
Yeah. FRQNCY.media. And you can also find us on Instagram at FRQNCY Media. So that's FRQNCY Media. And on LinkedIn, you can also find Recordical at recordical.com. And Recordical, the biggest call to action with Recordical is signing up, requesting a location near you, and also connecting me with investors who you think would want to help fund this for rapid expansion.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, this is how we do it on the podcast. Or I will say this is one of our biggest wins, but there are a few other wins like that and some on my website, dotslovesmarketing.com. Again, dotslovesmarketing.com. You want to subscribe. It's the Marketing Leadership Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I would like to thank Des Krieg, Listen Network, and Content Allies for supporting this. It's been quite a run. Till next time, connect the dots.